This is Business Insights with Mario and Matt, and so we are blessed to have our first guest, not live in studio, unfortunately, though he is live from Melbourne, Emil Barna. Emil is a psychotherapist and he specializes in treating anxiety, stress, and the impacts of trauma. He's helped hundreds get better through evidence-based and novel treatments, and he loves creating a therapeutic experience tailored for the individual.
That's the reason why we have him as a guest today in the studio to help us first. Emil, welcome to the studio. Hoping you are having a beautiful day so far.
It's wonderful to be here, Maria and Matt. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Emil, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for accepting my invitation. Emil and I never met in person, but Emil and I shared a mutual friendship with somebody in Melbourne. One very brave and very courageous woman, Bekes. And I saw that she done the podcast with Emil, and I said, like, okay, let me check on this guy, you know what I mean? And I was like, God, man, psychology, the podcast and everything else. And yet it was such an easy conversation, Matt. So, Emil, we have the tradition here, Matt and I, past 12 months in studio, when we have the guest, instead of just reading your bio, and just glorifying everything else, we like to let you say to our guests, who is Emil Barna? If I didn't say properly your name and surname, blame Matt Caruana. It's his fault, not mine. But, people just enjoy my sexy voice. So, Emil, first of all, thank you for joining us in studio. I know your time is precious. And for all listeners of Live 90.5, Business Insights with Matt and Mario, who is Emil Barna?
Oh, isn't that the age-old question? Who am I?
Okay.
What I would say is,
well, thank you, Emil. That will be it. You know what I mean? So that's. Please continue.
I'll let you know when I find out who I am. But for all practical purposes, I'm a psychotherapist. I've been working in the field for just around 7 years, and have been helping many different individuals kind of come through the other side of addiction, trauma, mental health, stress issues, all that sort of stuff, which I tend to find quite prevalent in this society that we tend to live in, more so in the past 2 years. But
yes.
In terms of my own upbringing, I am a child of immigrant parents who migrated here in the late 80s. They came from a communist country of Romania, and they had escaped that regime. Mm-hmm. I was born here in Australia, grew up under their tutelage, and I'm the third child of four brothers. Three brothers. I'm the fourth child of my parents. And what I would say is, over the time that I've been alive, I've kind of had quite a few stories under my belt. Dropping out of school in year 10, deciding to go back after having a bit of time underneath full-time McDonald's, that kind of area, and then going back into studies, doing an undergraduate in psychology, and then graduate studies in counseling and psychotherapy, and then starting my own work, both privately and publicly. I write quite a lot. I put together a podcast where I interview experts in their field, and I try to give a bit of a psychological understanding of why we are the way that we are. So, in essence, I'm a content developer, psychotherapist, writer, and podcast host.
So, Emil, okay, I've got a question lingering heavy on my mind, considering the work I do. I work a lot with high school students, and something that's very big, very, very big is you need to finish your HSC. You need to finish your schooling. You said you left school at year 10, and now you're a psychotherapist. Firstly, yeah. Is the HSC, is that the be all and end all? Finishing high school.
So I think over the past few years, organized education, this is my personal view based on what I've seen, it doesn't always have to be in traditional institutional how do you say, organizations, so to speak. Many people these days can become very successful, regardless of whether they do attend university or not, depending on what it is that they'd like to put their hands at. So I have plenty of people in my own circles who make a really good income, make a great meaningful work by through the trades, or who decide to develop their own businesses, or sell products, or do these things that don't require university education. But for some people who may want to have a job, say as a lawyer or as a physician of sorts, or as an engineer of sorts, that's when traditional type of schooling and education can be quite useful. In my own experience, dropping out of school in year 10 was probably the best thing that I'd ever done personally, because it got me to stop and think about what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And that space, I started and I did a bit of trade work, and then I went into working at McDonald's as a full-time worker at McDonald's, and then I decided I want to do something different, and kind of there's a whole story back to that. So I don't know how much time we have today, but
depends how much time you want to have with us. That's what it's like. We like to have it more. But Emil, before we take a short break, I'd like to ask you one very sensitive question. If you can answer, please. Yes, you can. Matt and I usually accept the payments in cash, but it's okay. You can give us a PIN number. Emil, honesty, it's not something people like to share. Everybody expects honesty from somebody. I just witnessed it so many times in my life. But that being said, you honestly stated, your part in life, you didn't say drop out, but you didn't go in school, then McDonald's, but yet you're becoming highly qualified, educated psychotherapist, successful podcaster. But if you help all these people, if you're helping all these people, different backgrounds, religions, and color, skin, everything else. But who is helping Emil Barna to deal with this load of everything? Okay, you don't need to now glorify Matt and I, because we are your psychotherapists today, so that's okay. But in all honesty, you're helping all these people, Emil, but who's helping Emil?
All right, so there's a short answer and there's a long answer to that one.
Well, choose, because I'm very curious, because, you helping other ones, what you don't know, like between studio, it's Matthew Caruana, which I truly believe you're going to befriend yourself between each other. Matthew is somebody who is helping the high school students, as he mentioned. What you don't know, Matt, he jumped from 35 meters tall building, tried to commit suicide but survived, so he ended up with me in the studio. So that's a tragedy for him. But even he needs the help, and adjustments and alignments and some whatever we want to call this. But as well, in all honesty, you're helping everybody, because it's not just your job. You're doing this because you love to do this, but somebody needs to help you. So how do you help yourself? Long answer, please.
Yeah. Okay. So there's two things. I get this question a lot. So or a variation of this question. How can you just sit there all day, listen to other people's problems? Does it ever weigh on you? Does it kind of stick with you, and that sort of stuff? How do you manage it? And the kind of answer that I give is there's a temperamental element to it. So in terms of how I'm built, and then there's a personality element to it, and then there's that social element. So let's look at the temperamental element. I tend to not be affected, generally speaking, as much as many other people in my field may be affected if somebody tells me some pretty disastrous things that have happened to them. I don't tend to get as emotionally involved in that sense as being wound up by those particular events. Therefore, I can remain relatively objective. And that kind of lingers with personality-wise. I can score quite low on the agreeableness element of personality, which means I tend not to be as agreeable as other people, and have a lower sense of emotional empathy. Though cognitive empathy is a different thing. Now, the difference between those two is you can connect with somebody and see what's going through them cognitively, and then the emotional element is when somebody tells you something, you can kind of get wound up by it, so much so that some people may actually feel the same emotions or the same pain as others may feel. I don't tend to get that involved from that sense, which puts me in a particular position where I'm like, I can hear what a person's saying, and I can, out of interest, try to relate and empathize with them without becoming wound up by that. So that takes care of how things don't necessarily stick with me. But at the same time, I'm very involved with my family. So I'm married. I've got 2 beautiful children. That's a little bit different. I have a very high emotional empathy with my children and with my wife. But it seems that with other people who are not as close to me, there's a bit of a distinction there. When I think about coming home to my children, coming home to my wife, they power me as well. What else powers me, and that this has always been the case, I always love to keep myself busy. I wake up quite early in the morning. I go to sleep relatively later at night. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of researching, a lot of interviewing other people. I like to find out who is the bee's knees when it comes to understanding the best way of being yourself. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I exercise. I eat as well as I can, and you're talking
to the Mario and the Matt on a live. Such a privilege, It is, Emil. It is. Look, I knew that you are the different guy, because one thing with Matt and I noticing with our guests, right? And we can share this publicly. Like, everybody has a story in life. Everybody has some different views and expectations from the life. Most of people believe that life and the world owes them, right? And they are larger than the I don't know, supermarket life. Yeah. But yet, like, you are the one who helped not 10 or hundreds but thousands of people, and yet you're being humble and being so preoccupied, looking after yourself, looking after your family, and today being with us. That's what makes you unique in my and Matt's eyes. Maybe, Matt, you want to share something before we wind up? Or?
Absolutely. And so one thing you touched on, Emil, is what it sounds like is you not only serve and help support so many people, you put yourself first as well by making sure you support you. You aren't emotionally getting involved in these situations that, these people, your clients, that they're sharing with you. It's emotionally heavy. And so by distancing yourself emotionally, you're keeping yourself well, allowing yourself to support them because you yourself are supported. I love that. And that's what I'm taking away from it. And I'd love to leave it on
I have like 5 questions more before we go. Can I go take a short break?
We should go take a short break though. Guys, you're listening to Alive 90.5. This is Business Insights with Mario and Matt. Be sure to stick around. This interview with Emil is one you don't want to miss.
Emil Barna, guys.
This is Business Insights with Matt and Mario, live with Emil Barna, who is based in Melbourne. We're very blessed with the beauty of telephones that we can have live on radio.
Well, imagine if you need to reach him, like last few months, where they had a lockdown. That would be, man, everybody goes in bed 9 o'clock, well, what are we talking about? We're seeing the same thing. But Emil, thank you for being with us in studio. Emil, I like to start this part of the show with a very few questions. I'm personally, interested, right? And I like to hear your professional opinion. Now, we are all the slaves of social media. No question asked. We can say, no, I can do this, I can do that. I say that before, like I can stop smoking, I'm not married 5 times, these things, but things are going on. But I do have the one question. Why the people on social media particularly all these big gurus, right? So self-called gurus started their statements with negativity or like to bring this thing, to the public. Once upon a time, I was young and, my life was not good because my dad didn't bought me chocolate, and then I decided to, go work in, chocolate factory. Why do people have a tendency to bring all this negativity in conversations to prove themselves worthy, and they are like, they suffer so much and everything else? Can you just summon me this one? Particularly on our business networks, right?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. All right, so there are a few things that my mind latched onto as you were saying that. The first thing is you've heard of the saying "sex sells."
Sorry, say again in English.
You have heard of the saying "sex sells."
Sex sells. Oh, okay, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Mario knows all about that. Yes, indeed.
Well, what I would say also that negativity attracts. Now, when we think of negativity.
Yeah.
When we think of negativity, we have what's called a negativity bias that is inbuilt within each and every one of us. And there's a very real positive reason for this. If our brains are able to pick up on the negative things, then it can prepare us on how to act. So if we are able to notice in our environment a potential threat, our brain hyper-focuses on this threat. And when we hyper-focus on this particular threat, then we become more and more sensitized to threats in the future so that we can react in a positive way. So to get out of that situation. Now, if I understand your thought, your question correctly, you said, why do people have a tendency to focus on the negative things that they have experienced in life?
Yes, because it's just a brief, because let's just say in LinkedIn, I'm seeing a lot of those business life coaches, you know what I mean? And, those posts are starting like, once upon a time, my life was boo-hoo-hoo, cry me a river. And this is the tips, how do you be successful? And I couldn't understand, I can't comprehend and try to use my little brain, you know what I mean? Why would I start something with negative, right? But you're the good guy, who can explain this because you're helping others with a dark deeds, I will call this, right? Okay,
well, so Friedrich Nietzsche, the very famous German philosopher who died in 1900, said this, and many of you have heard this before but may not know this is where it comes from: what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Now, that comes from a philosophical approach that when you overcome something, then necessarily you have overcame something that was out to cause you threat, to cause you destruction. And it adds a sort of authenticity to say that this is what I have accomplished and this is how I have done it, in a way to establish a validity to the story that you are about to espouse. Now, why do we do this? You have to ask for each person's individual motivation. So if you're on social media and somebody is trying to sell a product and they want to create a need for that product, it has to appeal to most people. So I've experienced stress. Hey, are you guys feeling stressed? Your heart's picking up, or you're slouching, or this or that. This is what I've got for you. This is how I used to be, and this is how I fixed it. It's appealing because many people, just like in social media, we are very attracted to quick fixes. And if somebody presents a quick fix, then of course, our body, our mind, our whole being wants to avert danger. That's the kind of thing. And so if a person is trying to sell something, sell a story, sell an idea, or sell a product, then it's often you need to create a need for that, which is what business is all about. And then a very simple way of maximizing your response to that through what it is that you are offering. And the only way that you can do that, or one of the ways you could do that, is by saying, I've been through it too. I'm not just talking out of my ass. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
that's okay.
That's okay. We didn't have that time to press the button. But see, our personal never, when I see posts like this, start all this I understand the sales process, right? But I truly believe that people have the serious issues when they start talking with this Crime River story. You see, as I say, I'm sitting next to Matthew Caruana, who jumped from the building, and he saw suicide with his own eyes. And, I never heard from him, Mari, like, wow, my life was this and that. He said what he's, you guys are leaving to talk on off the radio, offline. But tell us, Emil, something. Last 12 months, what did you saw as a psychotherapist, your biggest concern or the biggest field of work in Melbourne during the lockdown? What did you saw, Emil, increase or maybe decreasing, or how did you help the people?
The most concerning thing that I'd experienced, I think, is the tribalization that's been happening.
The tribalization.
Say this in English.
Now let's think about what does that even mean. Now,
yes. That's correct. Like
and
for me,
this is important because to be tribal or the tribalization is that there are more and more groups that a person can pledge allegiance to these days, and that can create conflict. Now, I think it's really, really difficult because to be think of tribes, different tribes. Back in the day when we lived out of caves, the tribe over the hill was the unknown, the danger, the person and people we had to watch out for. And now these days there has been a lot of distrust with many people who are responding in particular ways to things like government mandates or lockdowns, or whether a person is vaccinated or unvaccinated, or the mental health effects on the children and all this sort of stuff. So you can kind of align yourself to so many different, so many different clans.
Yes.
And if you belong to one clan, then, humans being humans, we find safety in numbers, and we want to demonize the out-group, the group that is different to us. This is just what we do on a day-to-day basis as a way of managing our own survival.
Sounds like we're just creating division within society.
It is.
It's like we're choosing to divide ourselves up based on what we identify with. I'm vaxxed, I'm anti-vaxxed, I'm liberal, I'm Labor, whatever you want to call it yourself, right?
Certainly.
And I think, please continue.
That's been the most troubling element of what I've seen in the past 2 years. In as simple as whether a person wears a mask or does not wear a mask, or a person is vaccinated or unvaccinated, a person votes Labor or Liberal, or a person is traumatized or not traumatized. I think it's really difficult here, and I use the word trauma in a very particular way, because what I think I am seeing over the time that I have been kind of observing these things over the past 2 years is that there seems to be almost a collective trauma that many people are experiencing on account of the division that we are experiencing these days. But more so than that, a collective trauma is that we can begin to find ways to notice all the negative stuff that's going on. We see this with this variant or that variant. It creates fear, and fear creates a drive to safety, and a drive to safety can lead people to the bottle or to try to find safety in other ways. So addiction starts to increase. The stress on mental health services starts to increase. We start to see people experiencing a lot more mental health issues. We see the waiting lists are just over the moon these days when it comes to providing services. We see people waiting 6 months to see a psychologist or a counselor or a drug and alcohol worker or something. It's a tough gig, and the thing that's I think the thing that is the most partly confusing, and on the other part very, very troubling, is that mental health practitioners, such as psychologists and therapists, don't appear to be as vocal as I would have thought they would be in relation to the effect.
That's very interesting observation.
Do you think that they've been caught maybe in the trap of it all, the whole illusion of the division?
I can only speak based on my own, what I've seen around me, and I can also see what I can see is that yes, there is an element of being caught, so to speak. There's a huge net that's been thrown out, and you've just been caught in it, and you're dragged along with everything that's going on.
Like a trawler,
there's
you know,
also,
trawler is not, seafloor, yeah.
But then there's also things like what a person can or cannot say based on the professional affiliation that they have. At one point, if you were to say something against what the professional affiliation that you were with advised,
yeah.
So such as APRA, if you were to say anything against lockdowns, then the psychologist could be called into question or lose their license. And this limits a lot of the discussion around the mental health effects that we have seen. And only recently have we seen more and more of these impacts of suicidal ideation, but not just that, suicide attempts and resuscitation attempts, which have risen significantly since 2019.
Yeah, I saw that somewhere I saw some analytics over this one about CPR, I won't say PCR, CPR. And that's a good indication what's happening there. And that's the reason why I asked you in the beginning that question, the start of the show, Emil. We all expected someone to help us, right? And we are not all uniquely built mentally. I can tell you the beautiful story. Me, oh man, I'm so strong. But I found the times when I was, dealing very difficult, with my own personality, because I was changing and adapting to something I'm really not. But on that note, I tell you something. Everything is finishing one way or another. Every one door closed, one door is open. So what I saw, like you just touched this base, it's remind me of my parents, right? And my father, and you can ask your parents as well, Emil. My father used to be listening Voice of America, right, in communism. And that was forbidden because every radio, every transmission device need to be registered by government. You pay the taxes and everything else, right? Long story short, my father would wake up 4:30 in the morning, walk in a bathroom, cover himself with a blanket in a bathtub, right? Having coffee and a smoke. Can you imagine under the blanket how it looks like? And guess what? My mom dobbed him. My mom dobbed him to the local intelligence office, right? Because, as you said, it's safety. Safety is in the numbers, right? So yeah, my mom dobbed my father. My father ended up 17 days in prison, right? Being all smashed, by secret police and everything else. So he needs to dob some other people. He couldn't, because he couldn't invent it. The names and everything else. But you know what it is, Emil? I live in a society who was dobbing each other. Society was a totalitarian and everything else. And doesn't matter, sooner or later, we all need to pay the price. Particular decision makers and, people who suffer and everything else. And I'm very grateful I know of you today talking to you, because hearing from somebody who is professional dealing with this on daily basis, and I believe you saw very young, people in your office. I'll call the office, I apologize if I should call differently. And the people who are, much more older than myself. So I'm very thankful that Melbournians have the Emil Barna who can help them. Ladies and gentlemen, listening on 90.5 Business Insights with Matt and Mari. Emil Barna from Melbourne with us. Stay tuned. You'll be glad you did.
We're live with Emil Barna, the psychotherapist based in Melbourne. And Emil, I've got a question for you based on, with Melbourne having gone through that incredibly tough time, something that I could not picture. I mean, like in Sydney, we had 4 months, 5 months, whatever in lockdown, but you guys had a ridiculous number of days in lockdown compared to us. Were you seeing an increase in people checking in with one another, being asking, "Are you okay? How are you feeling? How are you really feeling?" Did you see an increase in that, or did people more shy away from it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I did any more than usual. What I did see was that people were discussing the external threat more, which is to say that the stresses were being discussed. So whether that was COVID, whether that was infection rates, whether that was case rates, whether that was lockdowns and the rest of that. So people were talking more about that. And as a byproduct of that, everyone would have had their own views on what was going on, and those views were being shared. But as for openness in taking in somebody else's view based on what it is that they were, if you agreed with them or didn't agree with them, I'm not sure I saw as much support as I would have liked. As a therapist, I mean, it's part and parcel of my job to check in with people and how are they doing. But in the general population, I'm not sure I saw that as much, apart from in certain online pages. There may be some presence who were some online presence in, say, Instagram or Facebook or what have you, where people were creating groups and posting things that were going on and the effects of things like lockdowns. And then you'd have, in the virtual world, you have comments and people discussing mental health more so. So I'm not sure if that led to people being supported, though I do know there were a few cases where people who were in trouble were being supported by the community. It may just be that I hadn't seen it personally. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I found it to be, I don't know, quite an interesting situation where the conversations around mental health were definitely, being more prevalent, being more spoken about in my experience. I mean, like, and obviously with the work that I do, I'm very much in that space, though it didn't seem to be happening, at least from my perspective, on a personal level as much. Publicly, people were talking about it, make sure you're still eating enough food, still exercising, still drinking enough water, still talking in and checking in with your mates, but who was actually doing it? Maybe been a different thing.
I can say, Matt, and sorry to cut you off there, it certainly was not happening from a governmental level or a media level where people were checking in, apart from probably the trademark call lifeline if you're having an issue or something like that. There wasn't a focus on mental health at all. In fact, the chief psychiatrist here in Melbourne was only brought to one press conference towards the end of one of the final lockdowns that we were having. Their voice was just not heard throughout the entire process. And even when it was heard, it was probably like a few minutes here and there. But there was just no presence of that, which is what disappointed me the most from a mental health point of view. We are supposed to be here to provide help, and God knows I was trying to do that as much as I could, which is why I started the podcast, which is why I started having conversations with other people and offering the support that I offer through my business and through my online presence and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I've got to say that I would have liked to see a little bit more.
Fair enough. And I can understand maybe the bit of frustration you're feeling, because I definitely feel that myself as well. I think it's almost hard to, and I'm just trying to see it from maybe the government's perspective, and while I might not agree with it, the whole process of having to put certain restrictions in place, and then talking about mental health, it always seems contradictory. But that, I mean, we should leave politics aside. I think, yeah. And I think that now that we're out of lockdown, now that, we can essentially live almost like we, did pre-COVID, what do you think the average person can do for not only themselves, but also the people around them to maintain good mental health and also promote better mental health?
That's a very good question. I think that's one of the more practical questions that I love to address. And I also want to frame it in a way to say that each state is very different. So, for example, in New South Wales, I understand they have the Freedom Day today. In Melbourne, we don't yet have that, and it's still a matter of people being offered there is still that separation between people who have been vaccinated versus people who have not been vaccinated, being offered different abilities to engage with the community, within the community. So what I always go back to is to find something in your life that you do have control over. This is extremely pivotal when it comes to moving forward in your day-to-day. So there was a man called Viktor Frankl, and he died quite some decades ago, but he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he was a psychiatrist who went through the concentration camps in Buchenwald, I think it was, in Auschwitz, and he wrote a book on his experiences there. What he saw was that as soon as people lost hope, within a few days, they died.
Within a few days, they died.
Within a few days, they died. When they had nothing to look forward to, they died. Now, what does that mean for us? For him, it was a matter of you cannot control every single circumstance as it is around you. When, being enclosed in the four walls that he was enclosed under, with the work camps, with the shoot on sight if somebody were attempting to break out, with the minimal food and all the rest of the experiences that there's horrific experiences where that Holocaust survivors had experienced. He went back to the one thing that you have to your control is what you say to yourself in a particular situation. Everything else can be taken away from you, every single freedom, so to speak, except the freedom to choose how to think and how to feel about a situation. Now, that's the beginning. I think that there's a germ of a beginning there where we can start to consider what is it that I have within my control in the here and now. For me, I can speak from my experience and the experience that I've shared with my clients and helped my clients through. It's about choosing a time to wake up, being consistent with that, having a glass of water in the morning, setting your body up for the rest of the day, getting some sort of physical routine going, getting some sort of exposure to the sun, getting some sort of exposure to other people as much as you can, doing something that you have within your control that is not limited by the other things that are happening around you. Because routine and consistency will create a series of expectations that you know are going to happen day by day by day. What is taken away from you is certainty. When we go through, say, a lockdown or go through a pandemic, we don't know what's around the corner. For people who are anxious about the disease, quite frankly, it's a scary thing for many of those people to see that there's an invisible enemy out there that's going to pounce on you at any point of the day and take you down and potentially kill you if you're immune compromised or if you're elderly or have other sorts of issues that are going on. It's quite scary to think about it like that. And the question is, what is it that I do have within my control, and what is it that I can do? But also be there for other people, because other people may not have that. How can you lend a hand, like you were saying, Matt, just before? Are you okay? What's going on with you today? How can I move forward with helping you today, even if it's just a family member? But I would say, at the very least, have a good routine during your day.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And what it really shows us, and why I love that answer, is that we all have the power to be in control, that there is always something that we can do to put in place, not only for ourselves, but also for others. So we've hit the hour mark and we have to go back to the news, unfortunately. So we'll be back with Emil Barna for the first segment of the next hour. We're very, very grateful that he's willing to share some more of his time. We have a lot of questions for him, but we'll be back very shortly. This will be the news coming up. Emil, we left off on quite an important note. We left off on how people can support not only themselves, but also other people in their lives. And while COVID brought a situation that was out of our control, we were forced to essentially lock ourselves inside. There were certain things that we could put in place for ourselves.
Just vaccinate yourself. That's it.
Mario. Cut to the chase. Yeah, we just need to, like you mentioned, take our power back by putting things in place for ourselves. And so I'd love to expand on that a little bit further, because unfortunately we only have another 8 minutes with you. So Emil, what else could people do to support other people in their lives?
Yep. All right. So number one, you have to find who is struggling, first of all. If a person's close enough to you, you'll be able to pick up what's going on for them by what they say, or even what they don't say. Often you can pick up how people are feeling by the things that they choose not to talk about. And that's a really important one. So say a person has a partner and they just never talk about their partner, that becomes a blind spot, then there's often a reason why they're not talking about something that's going on for them. Same goes with work, or same goes with other issues that are going on for them. So you've got to be a bit tuned into what's going on for other people in and around yourself. You can ask very simple questions, like things like, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? Or going into Freedom Day in New South Wales, hey, tell me, what do you guys got planned today? What do you think of what's going on right now? And who are you catching up with? And that sort of stuff, being able to get a sense of what's going on there, but also reflect back what they tell you. Some of the really important bits are knowing what to say when a person says something. If you maximize on the last, say, 3 words that they say, and you reflect that back to them, then you have a good move forward. So number one, it shows that the person's listening. Number two, you can kind of summarize what the person says instead of just going in there with what you think they're saying. It's like, okay, so you're saying X, Y, and Z, and you capitalize on a few of their words, and you can kind of go with that. So that's one thing. But also knowing what it is that they need. Do you need anything from me? Is there anything I can do to kind of help out? And most people would say no if they don't want to put other people out. So in that case, you could just emphasize and say, hey, listen, I am here for you. I do want to make time for you if you do want to have a chat about this or that. And also saying things like, I may not understand what you're going through, but I'm here to listen. That's a really important one, because most people just want someone to listen to what it is that they're saying.
Small, simple things, it's the most effective, I will say, because just listen to you, even if you ask somebody and be honest, as you say, this is exact words, I may not be able to help you, but I'm here to listen to you. It can be most effective tool, actually, in helping somebody.
Exactly, Mario. Yeah, because it shows that what they're going through isn't trivial, and it's not trivial to other people. It's not insignificant, and I think that's an important process. But also knowing when to help yourself, because you can be all things to all people and then leave little room for yourself. What I would say is, in addition to these sorts of things like making a routine, making your bed in the morning to get ready for the day. I mean, people who are highly depressed, they would not make their bed in the morning, for example. And one thing that a person who's depressed could do is just make their bed in the morning, and it creates a sense of closure to that chapter and prepares them for the rest of the day.
Not making bed in the morning, actually, it's a sign of depression. Interesting, like I didn't know they say. But Emil, before, because I know we are chewed into the time we don't have with you, unfortunately, and we are very grateful that you allow us to talk to you a little bit longer. But before we wind up, Emil, how the people can find you and what services do you offering?
Yes, certainly. So you can find most of my information on barnacc.com, so BARNACC.com. So that's Barna Counseling and Consulting. You can also find me on social media. So my Instagram tag, handle rather, is the Emil Barna, so TheEmilBarna. It's the same for Facebook. I'm also on there posting things. And on YouTube, if you type in the Emil Barna podcast, I'll come up on there, or you just type in my name on YouTube. But if you want the link, it's youtube.com/EmilioBarna. So Emilio Barna is that tag where I post a lot of psychology and psychology-related content, as well as strategies and my interviews and clips that I conduct with many people. And if people want to come to see me privately, I do offer telehealth services at the moment throughout Australia in very unique ways, but you'll find out all about that on the website if you're interested. Those I think would be the main areas that you...
And I'd like to inform our listeners on our live 90.5 FM Business Insights with Matt and Mario. Everybody who talks today with Emil Barna gets 75% discounts of their services. Just quoting
Mario Bekes.
Mario and Matt. Yes, that's correct. Now, jokes aside. Emil, thank you very much for being our guest.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. I hope that this has spoken to someone.
This has definitely spoken to me. So
thank you, Emil.
Thank you
I'd like
very
to
much,
invite all our listeners, please come tonight to the website live905.com.au. There's going to be a podcast with Emil Barna and the details how you can reach him and how he can assist you. Emil, thank you very much. And now, listeners, we take a short break and I come back with more stories.
Thank you very much, Emil.
Thank you.